Hey everyone, let's talk about a 2019 movie called Rabid, a remake of a 1977 horror film of the same name. We start the movie with Rose Miller, a quiet, plain Jane woman with big dreams of becoming a famous fashion designer, staring at her boss's billboard, but snaps out of it when a car honks at her. Rose arrives late to her work in the women's fashion industry, causing her snooty boss, Gunter, am I saying that right? To take notice by asking her in front of her coworkers what her reason is for being late yet again. She tries to explain, but he cuts her off, because he loves hearing his own voice, but also wants her to show up on time for work, making everyone else laugh at her expense. Gunter uses Rose to segue into the introduction of his latest collection as his employees clap to boost his oversized ego. Later, when vegetarian Rose quietly eats a salad by herself, Gunter's assistant dumps some ugly-ass pile of fabric on her desk and tells her that he needs it done before tonight's show. Photographer Brad Hart stops at her desk and asks her to be his date to the after-party, but she surprises him by declining his invitation. I was getting vibes that the model Chelsea had put him up, like how popular but mean teenagers in high school would pull a mean prank on an unsuspecting nerd. He then sits down next to her and directly asks her to be his date, to which she finally agreed. I was already thinking of the 1976 horror film Carrie at this point. Chelsea then goes to Rose because she needs her clothes to come down in size. We learn later on in the movie that Chelsea's family took Rose in when her family died in a car accident. We also come to find out that Chelsea isn't a typical stuck-up bitch of a model. She loves eating dead animals while Rose consumes B12 pills and the garden variety fruits and vegetables birthed by Mother Nature. She then invites her sister from another mister to go to the after party, but Rose tells her that she's going with Brad. Despite Chelsea's shock at Rose's upcoming date, she volunteers to pick out something nice because she doesn't want Rose to wear her fashionably dull work clothes. Later that evening, Rose is standing by herself in the ugly-ass black outfit Chelsea picked out for her. What was she thinking? It doesn't even look like club wear. After the bouncer finally lets her into the club, Brad sees her and takes her to the second floor overlooking the club. He tells her she looks hideous. I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic, but I was 100% standing behind his comment. Brad looks down on the club floor and wants to know if Rose will go say hi to the boss, but she doesn't want to because she always makes herself look like an idiot around him. She later explains that she can't talk to Gunter because she's wearing one of his pieces without his permission, and here I thought that Chelsea was going to find something in her own closet to lend to Rose, not an expensive designer piece of shit that would make Gunter lose his rigged top and try to kill her with his assistant's own bare hands. In the middle of this riveting conversation about career goals and clothing theft, Brad's horniness gets the better of him as he surprises Rose with a saliva swap. He then asks her if she wants something to drink, and she pretty much leaves it up to him to figure it out for her. My guess is she doesn't normally drink and didn't know what to say. But at this point, I figured Brad was going to spike her drink with some date rape drug. While Brad leaves to fetch his drinks, Rose goes to the women's bathroom to check herself in the mirror and then sits in the bathroom stall where she overhears a pair of drug-addicted twins gossiping about how Chelsea got Brad to ask Rose out to the after party. A humiliated Rose confronts Chelsea about the date, but her friend really thought she was helping Rose hook up with Brad. She then takes off in a hurry on her bike, but gets hit by oncoming traffic as Chelsea screams in the background. Eventually, we find Rose in a hospital bed with most of her face covered with bandages. She wakes up moaning while Chelsea calls for help. I get the feeling that Chelsea is Rose's only friend. The doctor arrives and asks her questions, but then tells her not to talk. Say what now? Dr. Kelloyd explains that they had to wire her mouth shut because of her broken jaw, and oh, by the way, her bite tore out a good portion of her intestine from her body. But hey, she'll do just fine living a normal life with a good diet and a much smaller intestine. Amazingly, she seems to be doing okay despite the horrific accident she was in. She must be on some really good pain management. Rose frantically writes on a small board that she wants to see her face. The nurse removes her bandages and hands her a mirror. She freaks out at what she sees. But damn, I would too. In all honesty, it would be very hard for a person to wake up to that every morning and say, "Hey beautiful, you're looking extra delicious today." Once the doctor and nurse leave, Rose writes, "I'm a monster." She wants to know if she still has a job, but all Chelsea could say is that it's really competitive. I guess she didn't want to tell Rose that Gunter didn't want her to show up, looking like Two-Face. As Rose falls apart mentally, Chelsea tells her that she moved all of Rose's things over to her house. Sometime later, later, Chelsea brings Rose home and excitedly shows her around, mentioning that Brad helped her carry stuff in. After she gets dehydrated from crying about her face, Rose blends a drink of nature's goodness and puts it in a monster-sized syringe. She tries to drink from it, but it squishes out of her mouth and makes a mess all over herself. Later, Rose reads an email from Brad, who can't stop thinking about her. Is he for real? I mean, is he being legit about his feelings? Then she reads an email with an invite from the Burroughs clinic and watches a video that gives her hope of being normal again. Chelsea takes Rose to the clinic and jokes about her willingness to do sketchy things to get free medical from them. Soon, Dr. Burroughs examines Rose's face and chest and almost looks like he's getting a boner by her wretched appearance. He said that Dr. Kelloyd brought her case to his attention and that she would make a perfect candidate for their experiment called stem cell manipulation. Nothing will be paid out of pocket because she's going to be one of their human subjects, essentially a lab rat. Immediately after the doctor leaves the room, Rose and Chelsea talk about what she should do, but Dr. Creepy is listening and watching them on the other side of the wall. Later in the operating room, Dr. Burroughs is covered from head to toe in red surgical gear. What is this, a satanic ritual? After surgery, Brad visits Rose in the recovery room and places flowers on the end table. He then holds her hand as she lays there unconscious. After Brad leaves her room, Dr. Burroughs confronts him asking if Brad's her boyfriend, but he just says he's someone who cares. So I guess he actually cares about her? Suspiciously, the doctor asks to have a conversation with him in another room that we don't get to witness. Sometime later, Dr. Burroughs watches the nurse taking care of Rose on video, and then turns around to touch a photo of a woman who I assume is his wife Cynthia, because there's a photo next to it of him and the same woman. Did he reconstruct Rose's face to look like her? Then Rose wakes up and goes to a mirror to remove the bandages from her face. She tears up as she does yet another face reveal and sees a beautiful woman looking back at her. But then her stomach gets impatient with her admiring her face and makes her go to the pool room, where she finds a man with the chiseled body of a Greek god swimming in the pool by himself. Dominic sees her and asks her if she's okay, but she just walks into the pool in her sexy hospital come fuck me gown. After he tells her that he's a well-known soap opera actor doing some maintenance, she kisses him and bites his mouth hard, causing blood to drip into the pool. She freaks out and leaves him unsatisfied with a bloody mouth. Dr. Burroughs examines Rose as she tells him about dreaming that she was in the pool. He reassures her that everything is fine and that she can check herself out of the clinic. He mentions there are some side effects because of the surgery she just had. She essentially now has immortal skin grafts that she needs to take medication for, and that she needs to drink the red bottles he provides for her to help keep the food down. He warns her that when she gets tired, she has to rest or she will get nausea and hallucinate at times. Naturally, she asks him what's in the bottles, and he feeds her a line of crap about a super protein that's specifically designed for her nutritional requirements. I personally would have opened the bottle and checked the contents right then and there, but I'm just paranoid like that. Rose then goes out to the waiting room where Chelsea is waiting for her, and at first, Chelsea doesn't recognize her. But after the initial shock, she hugs Rose and they go home. I mean, Rose's face isn't that much different from how she looked at the beginning of the movie, in my opinion. When Chelsea goes to work, Rose designs a new dress as she thinks about how Gunter told her before that her designs were boring. She snaps out of it when she hears a knock on the door. Brad shows up with the roses and apologizes for what happened, but he's shocked by Rose's beauty. Okay, yes, she's beautiful, but is she really that much different looking? He tries to ask her out, but she closes the door on him after taking the flowers. Later on, Rose is out with Chelsea and tells her what happened with Brad. Chelsea reminds her that she's pretty now. Right, because pretty girls are entitled to be mean and bitchy to other people cursed with mediocrity. At the club, Gunter calls out to Rose, and he's amazed by the dress she designed for herself. He invites her back to work, and she tells him that she wants to get back in on his new collection. He tells her not to let him down, and then leaves with a small entourage. The girls go into the club and celebrate by drinking and dancing the night away with two random guys. At some point, Rose leads the guy away from the club scene, pushes him up against the wall, and slashes his body as she has a buffet on his neck. Then she wakes up in her bed the next morning alone and confused. Meanwhile, Dominic is on set and sweating like crazy, complaining like a spoiled actor. My guess is the bite he got from Rose is affecting him. As he and his co-star act out their scene, he uses unnecessary force on her, causing her to get hurt in the process. The director tells him to bring down the intensity and sends in a younger actor named Trent Taylor. This pisses off spotlight-hungry Dominic. He then attacks the unsuspecting guy, throws him to the floor, and gives him the hickey from hell, causing his co-star to scream willy-nilly. All this is happening while the director and his assistants sit there doing nothing. Rose is working on a design when she suddenly feels pain in her stomach that grows with intensity as she tries to take her medication. Unfortunately, her excruciating pain forces her to the floor in a fetal position. A little while later, the pain goes away and she chugs the entire bottle of red that the doctor gave her. She rummages through the fridge and finds a bloody piece of meat that she licks. Rose's vampiric tendencies make her suck the blood from the meat tray in a non-vegetarian way. She hurls into the sink and tries to call Chelsea, who is probably too busy being a model. Meanwhile, a tattooed guy gets kicked out of the club and tries to hook up with a woman who rightfully ignores him. He gets mad and continues to verbally badger her as he walks down the sidewalk and doesn't even notice Rose following him to his car. She asks him to give her a ride, and of course, he agrees because he figures he's going to get some sort of sexual favor from her. They get in the car and she bites his hand, making him aggressive. He thinks he's going to take her down with his sexual prowess, but she pushes him down and bites his neck, snarling as he pleads with her to stop. Once again, Rose finds herself alone in her bed the next morning, but this time, the coat she wore the night before is on her bed and her fingertips are covered with blood. While Rose is suffering from an existential crisis, a lone nurse at the hospital hears strange noises and realizes Trent, the young actor that Dominic chewed up, had removed his bandages from his face. He turns around quickly and scares her shitless as she tries to push him away from her. He chomps a few of her ditches off like chicken fingers as she screams hysterically. The hospital alarm goes off as Trent drums the nurse's head against the floor repeatedly and then attacks other male nurses before he smashes his head through the glass window of a door. Once again, Rose is back at the Burroughs clinic getting checked out by the suspicious Dr. Burroughs. She tells him about her dreams, the meat and blood cravings, and crazy hallucinations. She tells him she's drinking blood and he says she's just dreaming. She wants to know when she will feel like herself again, and he says it's up to her. A boldly dressed Rose once again shows up late to work, but Gunter could care less. He eagerly rifles through her portfolio, but she thinks her fashion pieces aren't ready yet, as he looks at the pages of art showing bold colors of red and black. He zeroes in on one particular dress and tells a very shocked Rose that he wants to create the dress with her for his collection. Meanwhile, a nurse at the hospital tells Dr. Riley about their first case of human rabies, and the patient's name is Dominic. When the doctor looks at him, he's shaking, snarling, and foaming at the mouth, no longer the sexy stud that he once was. At the restaurant, they talk about her medical condition. He even tells her he cares about her. At this point, we know he's aware of what she's really dealing with because of his previous discussion with Dr. Burroughs. Brad goes to touch her, and she looks like she's about to throw up. She rushes to the bathroom and opens her mouth. Nope, you're not from Wakanda. Instead of perfect white veneers, nasty-looking fangs stick out and pus is spitting out of her mouth. Rose rushes back to tell Brad she has to go home, and some crazy man jumps through the window and tries to attack Rose. As the guy bites an innocent customer who just wanted to eat, Brad beats the bloody hell out of him like a seasoned serial killer as Rose takes off. We're once again back at the hospital as Dr. Riley talks to the nurse about another patient named Dana who has rabies. They casually walk through the hall of infected people. I wouldn't be so calm being surrounded by them. Dr. Riley assumes that something is coming in close contact with people, but he can't put his finger on it. He doesn't want the nurse to contact the media for fear of mass hysteria. Suddenly, an infected, uncontrollable man in a Santa suit gets shot down by security and makes the doctor mad. While the good doctor gets upset at the security guards, Rose is on the sidewalk screaming because her face looks worse than she got into the car accident. She ducks into an alleyway, but an old good Samaritan follows her, trying to help her out, until he sees her face. For some reason, we see Rose hallucinating that she's in a hospital bed with strange nurses assisting her. She is dressed in one of her designs, and she keeps trying to wrap up her face and hoping that her grotesque look will go away when she does another face reveal. And then she wakes up in her bed again the next morning. Rose then tries to get a hold of Dr. Burroughs and leaves a message about her growing concerns. She drinks another red bottle but drops it, only to find what appears to be blood pouring out of the bottle. At work, Gunter drones on and on about life and death. Chelsea asks Rose about her and Brad. Rose tells her that they went on a date the night before, but she had to go home because of an upset stomach. Chelsea is appalled that Rose didn't tell her about their date until now, but leaves when Brad comes over. He asks Rose what had happened last night, but she doesn't even know how she got home. At that moment, Gunter calls her over to examine the dress Chelsea is wearing and gets her to change it in front of everyone. So she cuts and tears the fabric feverishly and then stands back. Gunter approves the hot mess and chooses to have Chelsea finish the show in the dress that Rose initially designed and then mutilated. He implies that if she keeps impressing him with her bold designs, she might have her own fashion line someday. Unfortunately, we hear on the news that the city is now suffering from an outbreak of rabies, but even with the outbreak going on, the fashion show is still happening. This is evident when a reporter asks Gunter about his choice to continue on with the show despite the health crisis. He responds with, "Fashion doesn't stop for anyone or anything. It's just a fucking head cold," in his opinion. Rose arrives backstage looking for Chelsea, but can't find her. Dr. Burrows calls her to discuss her blood work and wants her to come back immediately for an extended stay. Not sus at all. I would be worried if I were her. Getting all the more stressed out, she tells him she'll be there the next day. Chelsea finally shows up backstage, looking frazzled with a wounded, bloody hand. She tells another woman she was bitten by someone on the subway. The woman reminds her that she's closing the show, so Chelsea calms down enough to get her hair and makeup done, even though she looks like she's going to hell in a handbasket. Ironically, Rose doesn't realize Chelsea is already there, but decides to call her cell anyway. She gets Chelsea's voicemail instead, and right on cue, Rose gets that excruciating pain in her stomach again. Two guys looking for a good time come up to her as she desperately asks for help. When they don't, a snake-like creature from her body kills one of the men, while the other guy gets knocked out by Brad, who showed up out of nowhere. Where the hell did he come from? Was he following her? He then covers up the creature with his jacket and injects her with something before taking her backstage again. Rose wakes up in a chair backstage and hallucinates the creature re-entering her body, but also mentally sees Brad taking photos of her. Brad tries to convince her to let him take her back to the clinic, but she refuses because she worked so hard to get to where she's at now. She wants to see her dress close the show. Can't blame the woman for her persistence and dedication to her craft. Later, Rose finds Chelsea wearing her dress. They have a BFF "we did it" moment before Chelsea gets whisked away because the show is about to start. Do people actually wear clothes they see on the runway? During the fashion show, one of the male models collapses and falls off the runway like a drunk mofo and comically staggers back on stage, while another model walks by. Brad anxiously tells Rose they have to go to the clinic now because he knows what's going on. She hears a woman with a chewed-up face screaming and falling onto the stage. Chelsea then appears with a bloodied face and does her angry catwalk, pushing models out of her way. Gunter yells at Chelsea, which irritates the model, causing her to wrestle with his face and neck with her mouth. Someone yells, "Freeze!" and Chelsea stands still as she gets shot to death, presumably by a cop. Later, Brad and Rose arrive at the Burroughs clinic where she tells the doctor that she thinks the virus is coming from her. Things are happening around her and she knows that are not hallucinations. As the doctor takes her to her room, she demands to know why he's giving her blood. He informs her that there is a disease killing thousands of people every day and wants to know if she's willing to save people from it. She agrees, and he tells her that death is killing everyone and the solution is behind that door. Fuck that, I'm totally out. I wouldn't trust a doctor at that point, but with her infinite wisdom, both Brad and Rose stupidly walk through the door and Dr. Burroughs locks them in from behind. We see the doctor on the other side of the wall telling Brad it's time to come clean. He tells Rose that he was using Brad to keep an eye on her because he's a photojournalist who can't resist a good story. Brad tells her that he was protecting her because the doctor had asked him to. Then he professes his love for her. What the fuck? This is absolutely not the right time for that. As Brad gets even more mad, the doctor presses a button that pours blood all over the enraged photojournalist. This causes Rose to feel that awful pain again. The doctor encourages Rose to feed because she needs the blood. Her stomach demands it. Brad takes off his bloody jacket and gets grabbed by a creature stuck to the wall. The doctor proudly explains that his wife had cancer and donated her body to the clinic's cause. She represents the breakthrough in his research. Her flesh was saved, but her cancer became immortal. Say what now? Cancer should be immortal, said no one ever. What the hell is wrong with this doctor? The crazy doctor thinks his wife, Cynthia, is even more beautiful now because of her immortality. But at that moment, the snake-like creature comes out of Rose's armpit and attacks Brad's neck. Coming out of her armpit is odd, but I guess it's better than coming out of her boob or genitals. She slices the tentacle from her armpit, and Brad collapses to the floor. The doctor encourages her to feed on Brad as he's dying. An angry Rose takes takes her knife and stabs Cynthia repeatedly as a screaming Dr. Burrows watches helplessly from behind the wall. When his wife is dead, she turns to the doctor and kills herself with the same knife, making the doctor scream even more for her than he did for his own wife. Why? Sometime later, the news announces that the military was able to control the outbreak and that all patients infected with rabies were killed, but yet no one outside of the clinic knows what caused the outbreak. Oddly enough, we find a calm Dr. Burrows blending meat and cooking steak, and then placing the tray of food in the same room where multiple deaths occurred. We find a clean Rose wearing a dress and shoes waking up on the floor next to the tray. Cynthia is still lying limp and dead on the wall behind her, but the room itself is clean. Rose reaches for her neck and realizes that it healed. She goes to the wall where the doctor tells her that immortality is expensive. She screams and hits the wall in anger and frustration. What is Dr. Burrows going to do with her now? Let me know what you think he would do in the comments below. Thanks for watching.